Well, it is good to see you again, brother. The return of our good friend Bob Vanderplots, who's back from your winter hibernation. Man, how you looking? How you feeling? You good?
I'm feeling great. A little bit unkept with the hair a little bit longer than it should be.
I've noticed that. You got the hair parted down the middle, a little feathery look.
Yeah, a little.
I mean, it's a little bit like if John Cusack, had grown up as a respectable adult, and not done all of those things to his body he probably shouldn't have. He might have looked like about this at about your age right now, in fact.
Kind of like a beach bum. Some people say midlife crisis. I do have to tell you, talking about beach, though. I was on the beach, Marco Island, Gulf of America. And one of your fans, he greeted me coming out.
You found one.
He greeted me
the
coming out.
pearl of great price, indeed.
He greeted me coming out of the water. He told me he's from Michigan. He said, "Are you Bob Vanderplots?" And I'm in a swimsuit and my hair's all wet with the Gulf of America water. And I said, "Yes." He goes, "I recognized you by your voice." And then, of course, he goes right into how much he loves you, how much he loves the Steve Day Show.
Let's not bury the lead.
Thrilled with the Monday segment. And then Darla and I went to Naples, to the Ritz-Carlton, and had lunch there, a great place to eat lunch there, overlooking the Gulf. And we ran into your guy again, Kelly, who's a bellman there, and he said, "We just love it." And he said, the Ritz-Carlton staff loves your show and what you do. So you're making a difference out there.
Oh, well, very nice.
It's always my pleasure to go to Florida in February to come back and report you're making a difference.
Did you do your perennial, I ran into John Boehner? In between, lung darts down there at Marco Island. That happened again?
I did see John Boehner a couple of times on the beach. I did not interrupt him by saying hi or stopping him, those types of.
Didn't ask him for a light?
I did see one time. There was a little bit of a smoke trail following him, but.
Sure, there wasn't sulfur? Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
So, anyhow, yeah, we do. But I got a chance to see a lot of people in Florida. A lot of them are friends of yours, of mine, and of the movement. So, as Donald Trump would remind me, the people in Southwest Florida, those are our people.
So,
and I got a chance to, just real quick, to see Governor DeSantis while I was down there too, doing exceptionally well, and he wanted me to give you his greetings.
No, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. What do you do around here?
What do I do around here?
I'm just kind of curious because, you've been gone for, the last month, and, all your team did while you weren't here is
my team
help win one of our best legislative battles of, the last 20 years in the state of Iowa. So just, there's this trend going around. What 5 things did you do last week? What did you do? When you're up here slaving in an Iowa winter, your team is up here down at that legislature literally playing Dodge Demons, all right, throughout the halls and corridors of the legislature, and you're on the white beaches of Marco. What 5 things did you do last week?
I got to tell you, Steve, it's a great life. But what it is, one is the team knows when to use me and when not to use me, and part of them knowing, hey, you don't need to be at the Capitol right now. Let us take advantage of this. But really the job around here is to cast a vision, raise the resources, and assemble yourself with the best team possible. And you got to see part of our team last week with Chuck Hurley, our Vice President of Elections and Policy, and Josiah Olson, who spearheads our elections effort. 2 of the best. And as a matter of fact, Chuck's in studio today just watching this along with his peer Ryan Ben and Danny Carroll and Mr. Doty back here. So Brett Doty. And they're all part of this historic seismic victory that everybody had a part in, including the Steve Day Show last week.
So let's talk about that victory. And it's been fascinating this entire time our state has kind of been, the front lines for this battle. Going back to because the gender stuff comes out of all the marriage battles.
Oh, it does.
And go back to all those shows I did back in that era on the marriage battle, and I kept saying every time we brought activists over from the other side and would listen to their pitch, I'm like, what you guys are really saying is there's no such thing as gender. Like, do you remember when Phil Robertson, our colleague here at The Blaze, remember when he and Duck Dynasty was the #1 show in America? And in an interview, I think it was it GQ? I think it was who he gave that interview to. And he said, well, he was asked about gay marriage. Like, I don't know, it's the birds and the bees, man. Dudes like chicks and chicks like dudes. I mean, it kind of seems like that's how we've done
this.
Pretty common sense, right? And because ultimately, you have to argue for the eradication of gender. If on behalf of you do ultimately have to. You have to say that it is not a natural state of being for men and women to be attracted to one another. And so therefore, if that's not a natural state of being, what's the point in having men or women then at all?
Exactly.
What's the point if it's just a unisex human process and not a uniquely sexual one based on the battle of the sexes or the attraction of the sexes? If that's not the case, then why do we need to have male and female as constructs whatsoever? Yeah. And now so after our state had the battle on marriage, as that was going on, we're gonna put this no gender stuff or whatever gender you want to be in the state code. Our state is the very first one now that has completely stripped that out of its state code, hopefully setting a precedent for the rest of the country at the exact same time.
Steve, we just talked about in our team meeting, elections have consequences. And so when Iowa was a blue state, people forget about that. In 2007, we were complete Democrat controlled. I mean, we had a Democrat governor, Democrat legislature, House and Senate leaders, and they pushed all of this stuff. Matter of fact, it's like Trump doing what he's doing right now the first month. That's what the Democrats did in 2007. They pushed all the LGBTQ nonsense whatsoever. And when we were having the conversations on your show on WHO radio about the marriage issue, remember saying the unraveling effect? Mm-hmm. Pretty soon we'll be questioning, are you a male? Are you a female? Who's a boy? Who's a girl?
And they would really bristle. We'd say stuff like that. That's never where this is going to go. That's always where it was going to go.
And your counterpart there, your peer there, was Jan Michelson. He did the morning show. And I remember Jan Michelson, when all this other garbage was taking place, he brought me back on the morning show and said, I'm going to give you an opportunity to spike the football in the end zone. Because all the stuff you were saying about when you unravel the institution of marriage is now coming true here in the state of Iowa as well. Mm-hmm. But now because of this whole common sense revolution, let's don't forget Donald Trump and all this. He did the executive order saying there'll be two genders, male and female. And we're not going to allow this nonsense to go forward. Well, courage begets courage. So he
he even put out a post the day before the vote.
And what's key,
just as we were getting concerned that maybe enough people were going to go squishy on this, and I saw the president put out a message right before we had the day before we had the vote saying, "Hey, Iowa's legislature should absolutely get rid of that crap." Yeah.
And so it tells you he's serious about this issue. Mm-hmm. But it also tell the Iowa legislature he's watching. What are you doing? How are you leading? Mm-hmm. But when I take a look at this, and we talked about this at team meeting again, team. I mean, yes, it was Donald Trump. Yes, it was Kim Reynolds. Yes, it was Representative Steve Holt. But it was the Steve Day Show. It was the Heritage Foundation. It was the Iowa Standard, Jacob Hall, who was doing some stuff on this. It was our team here of Danny and Brett and Chuck and Ryan and Josiah doing their deal, our Church Ambassador Network. It was a whole team effort to get the victory that we got last week. And that is key in the country because we're the first state to remove it. But I've got to believe there's going to be a lot of other states now who want to follow suit.
I mean, you put enough teams together, and sooner or later you have a movement, right?
Exactly.
And that's kind of something we have lacked. There's been this thing called the conservative movement. I mean, I've said on my show for years, there's no such thing as the conservative movement. There's an industry that holds a few conferences a year, but by and large, it doesn't coordinate on multiple levels in order to actually enact the very policies that are in all the books that it sells and all the wares that it peddles and everything else. Well, in this case, we actually saw we saw from, as you mentioned, Jacob Hall as a local Iowa blogger covering this stuff all the way up to the President of the United States and several points in between. You saw enough teams come together and you form a movement, and then you end up, because what they have over there is a movement. I mean, if you were now its numbers they pale in comparison to ours.
Sure.
It's just we don't have the level of conviction they do, and we often don't behave as a movement. Okay, but ultimately, if you were curious, by the way, who exactly Ann Seltzer polled right before the election, it was the people that were down at the legislature for the last 2 weeks. Apparently, the only people she called.
Right, yelling,
screaming. It was like scenes out of the New Testament, demonic seething, and everything else. All right. Well, ultimately, if you don't have a movement, your elected officials, unless you got real lucky and you have like a fleet of them with a lot of personal conviction, you don't, and you never have. That's never existed in human history, by the way. All right. So minus that, where they just have their own personal level of conviction and there's a critical mass of them that they'll just withstand all that on their own. That's typically not how this rolls since Genesis 3. So most of the time you need to have a counter movement to the other movement. You need to have a counter movement that both encourages and equips and holds feet to the fire that is at least as loud, if not louder, than the seething that the people we represent are going to face. Even in a state like Iowa, we're not used to seeing stuff like this. Even in a state like Iowa, if there is no counter movement, asking people to withstand that level of pushback that's just not how human nature works.
And movements, you and I know too, Steve, we talked about this not that long ago, but movements need leaders as well. And so with Trump being a leader, Governor Reynolds being a leader, Governor DeSantis being a leader, all of a sudden you're seeing a rise for this movement to take place. And we're finally getting a return to normalcy, a return to common sense, which, as we've talked about not that many weeks before I left for Florida, is based on God's word. That's where our common sense revolution comes from. And Steve, to go back to Florida, I had the opportunity to speak to the Southwest Florida Republican women and give them a shout out. Great crowd at a luncheon. But after I gave my address, they had me for a Q&A. And I told them for the first...
And you told them, listen, I got to be honest with you. In person, Steve Deace is way better looking than he is on camera. Because I know you got questions about that, right?
Yeah, all the time. I said, how good looking is Steve Deace? But I said in the first time in a long time, I really believe we have a chance to restore marriage between one man and one woman in my lifetime. So I think you're starting to see people, their eyes getting wide open now, like, here was the unraveling that we were just talking about. You dismantle marriage, pretty soon you don't know what restroom to use, boys get to play in girls' sports, all the other nonsense that gets to go on. So hopefully we see a return to that common sense as well.
Around the country right now, there are people listening that are like, that's great that you guys have this stuff in Iowa. I'm in a traditional red state. We can't get him to do jack squat. Okay. Or I feel like I'm in a blue state, but much of the state is red, but we have these urban areas that just drown everybody out. And because I get these kinds of notes all the time, so let me throw one of them at you. What would you say to encourage those people in our audience right now? How? Because, we are the state that sent Tom Harkin's mailbox to Washington for 30 years.
You bet.
Okay. So it's not like this is, a long-standing red state by any stretch of the imagination, right? So what advice would you give to activists around the country of what they could emulate that we've been able to do here so far? And hey, it's not like we are all very contented with our national representation in Congress. So it's not like we have a perfect score right now, but we have moved this state demonstrably to the right in the last decade or so. So what advice would you give to people around the country?
Well, some practical advice, number one, is don't ever give up. We talked about that. We went through desert seasons in the Iowa legislature where nothing moved our way. So don't give up. Keep being that voice. Remember the powers in we, the people. But then engage the bride of Christ. That the ones that are still true to God's word and believe that Jesus is the way. Engage the bride of Christ like never before. And I tell you what, prayer moves mountains, prayer moves legislatures as well. And we've seen it in Iowa. From what we talked about, where you're doing the WHO radio program to where we're at today, that's night and day. That's prayer moving mountains. So I'd say don't give up. Emulate states that you want to be like. And maybe that's Iowa right now. But emulate what has worked here and see how can that work in your blue state or in your red state.
Real quick, we talked, or I did, for about 15, 20 minutes about what went on at the White House with Zelensky and Trump and J.D. Vance. And that's continued to have reverberations all weekend long. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, I do. I think what it is that Trump resetting, who's the leader here? I loved it when he said, listen, you have no cards. You have no cards on your own, and you're playing a losing hand, and you're flirting with World War III. But with us, you have cards. And I loved how JD put it in there, too. It's like, don't come to the Oval Office and lecture us. You should come to the Oval Office and thank us for helping you out at this point. And I think it was masterful. This is Trump being Trump. To have this, all the press covering this and have it on TV, even where Trump says, this is going to make great television. He still knows what's going to make great television.
It's funny because you and I come out of the sports world, right? Yeah. And there is a natural order of things, okay? And everybody understands sometimes you're the water boy, sometimes you're the point guard, sometimes you're the quarterback. Everybody's got a position, right? Yep. Okay? And what's really bothered me, and that sort of masculine meritocracy did our culture well for generations. And we've just completely upended that. And now we are getting bullied by the guys who, we didn't have to bully them into carrying our gym bags. They asked for the honor and privilege of it.
Right.
And now they're the ones bullying us. There's just something deeply wrong about that, right? And kind of what I just saw in the White House on Friday was like we were resetting the natural order of things.
Yep.
You need to shut your hole, jabroni, and know your role, all right? You are allowed to breathe because we breathe first, and you will take not one more breath than we will permit you to have, just so we're all clear here, all right? These things need to be reset. And we've kind of lost that completely in the current effeminate unisex culture that we have.
Without question, reset, go back to foundation, go back to the fundamentals. And that leads me into the last thing I wanted to talk about, Steve. And this has nothing to do with Gene Hackman as a person or Gene Hackman's death, but one of the greatest movies of all time, the movie Hoosiers. Because where he insisted on team, no one's bigger than the other one, but the fundamentals, the foundation, he reset a team to win a state championship. I just love that movie. We played a clip for that in the team meeting as well. But I think what you're starting to see is this common sense come back, this return to normalcy come back. Red, white, and blue Americans standing up, giving voice. Praise God we get to live in such a time as this.